But a lot of people that are watching will know you as the guy that Zidane headbutted.
Yeah.
Have you not seen him at all since, at all?
No, but
Wow.
we will try. But for me, I'm open. We are old. I'm grandfather right now,
Yeah.
so I don't need to fight.
Zinedine Zidane is remembered as a genius with the ball, but behind the elegance was a fiery temper that created enemies on and off the pitch. From brutal insults to infamous clashes that shocked the world, these are the players Zidane could never forgive and the stories most fans never hear. It was the spring of 2004, and Real Madrid were the Galacticos, Zidane, Figo, Ronaldo, Beckham, a team that looked untouchable. But in the Champions League quarter-finals, a young Monaco side stood in their way. That's when Zidane came face-to-face with winger Jerome Rothen, and what happened that night became one of the darkest memories of Rothen's career. The match itself was already tense. Real Madrid had taken the lead in the tie, but Monaco refused to back down. Every duel carried extra weight, and when Rothen went in for a hard challenge, Zidane snapped. According to Rothen, Zidane stood over him and spat out words that cut deep. "Get up, you son of a B******. It wasn't just trash talk, it was Zidane, the national icon, humiliating him in front of the world. For Rothen, that moment stung more than the defeat or even the pressure of the Champions League. He later admitted in his autobiography that it left a scar on his career, describing it as a black point he could never forget. And it didn't end there. When Rothen tried to publish his book years later, Zidane's camp allegedly pressured him to remove the story altogether, as if it was something that needed to be erased from history. That kind of anger and power play revealed another side of Zidane. Fans saw the magician who glided across the pitch, but behind the scenes, he could be ruthless with opponents who dared to stand in his way. Rothen would go on to say that facing Zidane in that tie was both the proudest and most painful moment of his career. Proud because he helped knock Real Madrid out, painful because of the words that Zidane carved into his memory. And as heated as that clash was, it was nothing compared to what came 2 years later on the biggest stage in world football. The 2006 World Cup final should have been the fairy tale ending to Zidane's career. At 34 years old, he was playing his last professional match, carrying the hopes of France against Italy. He had already scored an audacious Panenka penalty in the first half, proving he was still the man for the big stage. But instead of walking into retirement as a national hero, Zidane left in disgrace, and the name responsible was Marco Materazzi. The clash between the two has become legend. Late in extra time, the match hung at 1-1. Zidane and Materazzi exchanged words after a tussle in the box. Materazzi later admitted he insulted Zidane's sister. Zidane never denied it. In that instant, something inside Zidane snapped. He turned, walked toward the Italian defender, and drove his head straight into Materazzi's chest. The stadium froze. The referee had no choice. Red card. Zidane's final act in football was a moment of violence, broadcast to hundreds of millions around the world. What made the moment even more infamous was what followed. France lost the penalty shootout, Italy lifted the trophy, and Zidane's career ended in chaos. He didn't apologize to Materazzi. In fact, he doubled down, saying he'd rather die than apologize for defending his family's honor. It was raw, emotional, and controversial. Fans argued for years, was Zidane right to stand up for himself, or did he throw away his legacy with one moment of rage? Materazzi, of course, thrived off the controversy. He became known as the man who broke Zidane. For many, that headbutt defined their entire rivalry. Materazzi, the provocateur. Zidane, the genius who lost control. And while Zidane has never truly spoken in detail about the insult, that final clash with Materazzi ensured one thing: Zidane's last memory as a footballer would forever be tied to hatred and humiliation. But this wasn't the first time Zidane's temper boiled over. Years before the World Cup final, he had already built a reputation for sudden, shocking outbursts that left opponents bruised and fans stunned. Long before the Galacticos and the World Cup glory, Zidane's temper was already making headlines. At Juventus in the late 90s, he was one of the best midfielders in the world, but also one of the most unpredictable. His genius could change a game in seconds, yet his rage could just as easily destroy it. One of the earliest examples came in the 1998 World Cup, before the famous headbutt against Materazzi. In the group stage against Saudi Arabia, Zidane completely lost control. Frustrated by a rough challenge, he stomped on an opponent lying on the ground. The referee caught everything straight. Red card. Zidane was banned for 2 matches, and suddenly, France's golden hope was under fire for reckless behavior. But it didn't stop there. At Juventus, opponents quickly learned how to provoke him. A mistimed tackle, a slight insult, or even a smirk could light the fuse. Zidane would lash out with elbows, headbutts, or scathing words. Teammates admired his brilliance but admitted he was unpredictable. 1 minute calm and composed, the next minute raging like a storm. This reputation followed him everywhere. By the time he moved to Real Madrid, Zidane had collected more than a dozen red cards in his career, an astonishing number for a player remembered as elegant and graceful. Each one told the same story, a man whose emotions ran so hot that hate wasn't abstract, it was physical. He didn't just dislike opponents, he made sure they felt it. And as Real Madrid built their team of superstars, Zidane wasn't just battling rivals on the pitch. Inside the locker room, with egos colliding and tempers flaring, new conflicts were about to emerge. By the early 2000s, Real Madrid had become more than a football club. They were a global spectacle. Florentino Perez's vision of the Galacticos brought together Zidane, Figo, Ronaldo, Beckham, and Roberto Carlos under one roof, a dream team that looked unstoppable on paper. But behind the glamour, the dressing room was a boiling pot of egos, pride, and frustration. And Zidane was right at the center of it. Zidane wasn't the loudest voice in the locker room, but his standards were sky high. Teammates have often said that if you didn't match his intensity on the pitch, he would let you know. Quietly, sometimes brutally, Zidane made it clear he had no patience for laziness. Players who didn't work as hard, who cared more about stardom than sweat, often found themselves on the receiving end of his disdain. One of the most whispered about tensions came with David Beckham. While there was no open feud, reports from that era suggest Zidane was skeptical of Beckham's arrival. Not because he doubted Beckham's quality, but because the signing felt more like a marketing move than a football decision. Zidane had come to Madrid to win, not to sell shirts. And Beckham's celebrity status sometimes clashed with Zidane's serious, focused nature. There were also moments of friction with Ronaldo. The Brazilian genius was adored by fans, but his fitness and nightlife habits were a running joke in the dressing room. Zidane, who prided himself on professionalism, reportedly grew frustrated with Ronaldo's lack of discipline. He respected Ronaldo's talent, but behind closed doors, it wasn't always admiration sometimes, it was irritation. Even Luis Figo wasn't immune. The Portuguese winger was a superstar in his own right, but sharing the spotlight with Zidane meant constant comparisons. Both men were quiet, reserved, but those close to the team said they didn't always click on a personal level. Zidane was intense, Figo was calculated. Their coexistence was professional, but far from brotherly. The Galacticos won trophies, but they also crumbled under their own weight. And for Zidane, that era proved one thing. Even among teammates, respect could quickly turn into resentment when the stakes were that high. But the battles inside Real Madrid's dressing room were nothing compared to the conflicts Zidane carried with rivals who tested his pride and patience on the pitch. Not every clash was as public as Materazzi or as bitter as Rothen. Some rivalries played out quietly, away from headlines, but they reveal just how much Zidane let grudges guide him on the field. Take Edgar Davids, for example. When Juventus faced Ajax and later Barcelona, Zidane and Davids collided in midfield battles that were as much about attitude as they were about football. Davids, aggressive and fearless, never backed down. Zidane, with his elegance and temper, often found himself provoked. Their clashes weren't just physical, they were psychological. Zidane respected Davids, but there was an edge in every duel, as if he couldn't stand being challenged by someone who thrived on chaos. Then there was Gennaro Gattuso, the bulldog of AC Milan. Gattuso's entire game was designed to frustrate artists like Zidane: constant pressing, constant fouls, constant trash talk. Zidane never openly said he hated Gattuso, but every time they met, sparks flew. For Zidane, facing Gattuso wasn't just about skill, it was about surviving 90 minutes of relentless harassment. Even within France's national team, Zidane's patience was tested. Rumors swirled about moments of friction with Nicolas Anelka, a striker whose talent was often overshadowed by controversy. Anelka's unpredictable behavior and clashes with coaches didn't sit well with Zidane, who valued discipline above everything. They played together, but their relationship was far from warm. What all these examples show is simple. Zidane didn't hate in the way most people think of hate. He hated laziness, disrespect, and players who crossed the invisible lines he lived by. Whether it was a reckless opponent, a teammate who didn't care enough, or a rival who mocked him, Zidane's response was always the same intensity, confrontation, and sometimes violence. And as his career drew to a close, Zidane's legacy became a strange contradiction. The most elegant player of his generation, but also one of the most explosive. Not every conflict Zidane had was headline news, but football is full of whispers, stories passed around between fans and journalists that paint a different picture of the legend. Some of these tales may not have the same level of proof as the Rothen or Materazzi clashes, but they add to the myth of Zidane's fiery personality. One name that often comes up is Zlatan Ibrahimovic. Although the two never had a direct feud on the pitch, there were reports of tension when Zlatan crossed paths with Zidane later on, once Zidane became part of Real Madrid's hierarchy. Zlatan has never been shy about calling out legends, and his arrogance was something Zidane didn't admire. The respect was mutual in public, but behind the scenes, many insiders believed there was no love lost. There were also persistent rumors about Zidane's dislike for certain defenders who targeted him with rough challenges throughout his career. Players like Marco van Bommel and even Joey Barton men, known for their aggressive, no-nonsense style, often spoke of Zidane with both respect and a hint of fear. They knew one mistimed tackle could earn them not just a yellow card, but Zidane's fury. Zidane didn't need words to show his feelings. His infamous stare, calm but deadly, was often enough to tell opponents exactly where they stood. Even within France, stories circulated about small disputes. Nicolas Anelka, as mentioned earlier, wasn't always on Zidane's good side. And then there was Frank Leboeuf, who publicly admitted after the 1998 World Cup that he sometimes struggled to understand Zidane's moods. Zidane wasn't the type to joke around in training. If you weren't focused, you weren't in his circle. What's fascinating is that Zidane never went out of his way to trash talk. He didn't write tell-all books or insult people in interviews. Instead, his feuds existed in body language, glares, and the occasional explosion. That silence made the rumors even stronger. Fans were left guessing. Who else had Zidane quietly resented? Who else had felt the weight of his cold stare? But whether it was whispers, rumored rivalries, or confirmed clashes, all of it built into one bigger truth. Zidane was more than a footballer. He was a man who demanded respect, and anyone who didn't give it was automatically an enemy. Looking back, Zidane's career is a strange paradox. On one hand, he was elegance personified, the softest first touch, the calmest control under pressure, a player who made the game look like art. On the other hand, he was unpredictable, emotional, and sometimes consumed by rage. The 7 names connected to Zidane's darker side, Rothen, Materazzi, Ronaldo, Beckham, Davids, Gattuso, Anelka, and even the rumored feuds with others all highlight the same reality. Zidane was never afraid of conflict. He didn't hate lightly, but when he did, it was unforgettable. He could humiliate a rival with a word, crush them with a stare, or in the most famous case, headbutt them on the biggest stage in football. And maybe that's why people are still obsessed with Zidane today. Because his story isn't just about brilliance, it's about humanity, genius mixed with flaws, art balanced by anger. For every breathtaking goal or magical dribble, there was always the possibility that Zidane's temper could explode in the next moment. That tension made him more than a player, it made him unforgettable. So when we ask the question, which players did Zidane hate the most? The real answer might be deeper. Maybe it wasn't just about individuals. Maybe Zidane hated disrespect, arrogance, and betrayal more than anything else. And anyone who crossed that line, whether it was a teammate, an opponent, or even an entire nation watching, would pay the price. The truth is, Zidane's greatest enemy was never Materazzi, Rothen, or Gattuso. His greatest enemy was always his own temper, and it was that fire as much as his brilliance that made him a legend.